We've had awesome response in the newsletter. If you're not familiar with our newsletter, if you don't have, if you've not been receiving it, you're not on our mailing list, you can go to our website, whyagain.org, and in the middle at the top it says join our mailing list. If you click that, you can put in your email information. And if you've missed the past newsletters, you can also pick those up on our website. And I put the link in the notes for the show the other day. And so you can actually pick that up and look at past newsletters and keep up to date with what we're doing. We've got the schedule on the website and the flyers on the website, so you can print that off and pass it around. Forward the newsletter to people you know. And welcome, Michael.
Thank you, dear heart, and welcome, everybody. We are honored and delighted that you're here with us today, that we get to have this opportunity to bring forward still a deeper understanding of this process called life, this opportunity to live as a human being and to advance as the truth of who we are. Human life, love and form. And Jeannie, do we have any hands up? Anything happening in the chat room?
Nope, it is all quiet on the home front.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the culture that, well, first of all, let me go in a different direction. I was just talking with Jeannie this morning, and she was sharing with me that a young lady who lives out in Las Vegas that we had met when we were out there had gotten herself in a serious car wreck and is really going through some just really horrendous stuff. So her name is Suze. And so I'm just going to ask everybody, a couple of people, but in particular, let's just see her surrounded in that compassion, that presence of love, the mercy that opens her field and allows these energetic assaults that have happened to her and created really serious injuries, that she can open and let those energetic patterns loose and be restored to health. And I'd like to just bring Patrick into the conversation. Patrick Quinn, if you're on the show, we'd love to hear your voice. And in the meantime, we did hear from you the other day, and glad to hear things are moving forward and seeing your blood pressure balancing out and your kidney function coming back to full 100% function. Lots of oxygen flow to the kidneys, supplying nutrients needed, carrying blood flow and nutrients, and restoring cellular function there. And Tim, to Bingham, to your eye, we hold that process of healing your eye is moving forward. But again, lots of oxygen flow, nutrient flow, removal of waste so that tissue is able to be restored fully and completely. There's another gentleman who's asked to remain anonymous at this moment, but is having some colon challenges, so we'll send him an extra shot of holding the space of love, knowing that whatever needs to be processed, whatever needs to be dealt with, is dealt with to move through healing in that area. So I breathe with everyone. Steve in South Florida, holding your lungs and your chest in total health, melting inflammation, and seeing the restoration of perfect blood flow and aliveness. So much going on in the world today, and I was reading an article this morning that so much division going on in the world that the pollsters are telling us that 70% of people believe that we may be on the verge of civil war in America. And I'd just like to hold the space for any mind energy in that regard to be dissolved, conflicts, on every level that are happening, that we can start to realize. And if we listen to Einstein, he says, if you think you're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, you're living in an optical delusion. It's time for us to realize, recognize who we are, and that we are in truth part of one body, and whatever the conflicts are, that we can hold a space in our heart for each other, different sides of any particular issue or argument or discussion, that we can still hold each other, hold these other cells within our physiology, within our bodies, literally, that we are all part of one body. In the ancient teachings, they call it the mystical body of Christ. But it really isn't so mystical to recognize that just like the human form has trillions of cells, in appearance, at least in the mind's eye, so the true form of this world is singular, individuated, but still singular in expression. And it's time for us to bring forward that conscious, active presence of love, that space of knowing our connectedness and our oneness, and having that compassion, having that space within us to allow love to flow through us to each other, that space that was called mercy. I'm joining each of you in bringing that forward into our world and really recognizing who we are individually and collectively. If we hold a newborn child, the truth about each one of us is that we are, in essence, the conscious, active presence of love. Not a word that's easily defined, but hold the newborn to experience its definition. And so let's just, as a community, hold a space for, 7.5 billion people to realize that that's who we are. And that we can bring that active presence of love forward for and with each other. And that where truth shows up, love shows up. They're different faces of the same coin. And in a world where we're probably the most drugged nation on earth ever, the most saturated in alcohol, and now left, right, and center, pot is becoming the legalized thing of the day, the legalized drug of the day. You might ask yourself the question, why would anyone want to live in a state where everything is based on a falsity? Why would anyone want to do that? And if you have to alter the chemistry of the brain, the so-called chemistry of the brain and physiology, with any kind of a drug, anything that puts us out of touch, and I've heard people say, well, I like pot because I feel better. Well, my offering is, no, I don't believe you feel better. I believe you don't feel, and you can hallucinate better. But when we're living in an hallucination, when we are divorced from the truth of who we are and the truth of what's going on, we're divorced from the capacity to advance as human beings, as the presence of love, as we're designed to advance. So the more that people live in the lie, in the artificial, in the constructs of the mind based in hostility or fear, and are separated from the truth, or have states of consciousness, states of mind that are artificially induced, the weaker that person's true powers become. And we're here to support each individual truly coming into their true power. Because the more we're separated from the truth of who we are, the more vulnerable we are. You know, we may say, oh, I feel better. I don't have to feel that hurtful thing that's going on in my life. Oh, yes, I can create an anesthetic and cover it over, and now I feel better. But in so doing, what happens by hiding truth from ourselves is we become more vulnerable to weakness, to suffering, and to obliteration. It's time for each of us to come back into relationship with the truth of who we are. Operating in a drugged or drunken falsity, a falsity that comes from denial and dissociation, will never benefit any one of us. So this work is about coming back to the truth of who we are. I was processing with someone yesterday, and they were telling me about how, well, there were only 2 situations in their lives where they'd ever experienced rage, and they were recent situations, and each one of those situations had gotten them into some serious difficulty. And it was something that I'd known for many years and watched and observed what appeared to be a lifetime of rage. And the pretense, acting as though there was no truth to that, left them in a false and altered state of consciousness that divorced them from the truth and had them acting out of what wasn't accurate about themselves. And it was interesting. It's someone I've known for a number of years, and someone who had brought up a particular event that had happened in their childhood. And as I kind of stumbled across making a statement about a particular issue, all of a sudden, and inviting this individual to be in touch with the truth of, wow, there's been a lot of rage in my life all my life. All of a sudden, there was this fit of rage. I became John the Baptist, ready to take my head off. I mean, literally yelling, screaming over the phone, "What's wrong with you? How dare you?" And it was interesting to observe that once the energy had cooled off and quieted down, the major incident that could be recalled in her life was one of conflict with her father. And the goal that in the moment, once we identified it, that she held for me in our conversation, was literally the goal that she held from 60 plus years ago for her father. The goal that had created a split mind that had left her dissociated from an energy that had run her whole life. I mean, we're in that state, again, living in an artificial state. Our true faculties can't be developed. We live in an hallucination based on a split mind. Yeshua talked about it as a house divided against itself. He says, a house divided against itself can't stand. If yourself is love, if you can acknowledge that the truth of who you are is active, present love, then anything that you hold that isn't love is a falsity. And if you live in that falsity, if you accept that falsity as who you are and as what's true in your world, then you're separated from your capacity to develop your human life. And my offering is that this opportunity to life is an opportunity.
Michael, you just disappeared. You might want to check your headset.
Okay, am I back there?
You are. You said it's
Well,
an opportunity, and then you just dropped.
Okay, strange. Nothing changed here, but so the offering is that having a human life, being handed a created state of being called love, is an opportunity to strengthen and develop. You know, when we talk about in the Purpose, Personal Power, and Commitment workshop, that the primary purpose of a human life is to develop a viable, conscious, spiritual body. This created self needs tending. I use an example of, let's imagine that we look at an eye cell, and let's presume that what would make an eye cell feel fulfilled, excited, and develop and strengthen as an eye cell would be being part of an eye and seeing. Seems like a reasonable assumption. Let's imagine, cancel the thought, we took an eye cell and we set it out there on the tabletop. And we said, now, eye cell, what would it take to make you happy? And the eye cell says, well, I want more money. I want more power. I want to control the world. I want to control everybody around me. I want more sex. I want a fancier car. I want a bigger house. I want. What do I, the Course talks about putting your trifling treasures away, because none of that has anything to do. There's nothing we can offer that cell laying on the tabletop, that eye cell, that will ever give it fulfillment or development until it knows itself as a part of what it is, an eye, and fulfills its function as seeing. Again, let's go back to Einstein. If you think you're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, you're living in an optical delusion. It's like taking the created being and laying it over there on the table and separating it out, or at least in appearance, separating it out from the rest of humanity. And then trying to find happiness and fulfillment in that state. The eye cell has to know itself as a part of what it is, of an eye. And it would seem reasonable to expect that as it's fulfilling its function of seeing, that it's going to experience fulfillment. If we don't know who we are, if we're living in a falsity continuously, and the whole idea, the primary tool of this work, the original workshop that this work started with, was, why is this happening to me again? And utilize first century Aramaic forgiveness as the key tool. Because without forgiveness, the falsities that we hold in our minds continue to appear to be true. Where first century Aramaic forgiveness collapses the falsity and gives us a chance to recapture the experience of who we are, to know who we are directly, not in our intellect, not because we're a quick study and we can figure something out. That's nice, you can figure something out, but if you don't have the experience, what good is it? What's the work that needs to be done to literally experience yourself and your physiology filled with the literal, conscious, active presence of love that you're designed to fuel yourself with? What do you need to do that? If you're living in anything else, you're living in a falsity. And the purpose of life is frustrated. What do you need to sacrifice? What do you need to give up? Oh, it might be the ego state of, well, I have to be right, or I have to be perfect, or I have to handle everything, or 1,000 goals that the ego mind says, this is what will make me whole and happy. My offering is that there's only one thing that will ever make anyone whole and happy. And it isn't winning somebody else. It isn't controlling. It isn't looking good to other people. It isn't being number one. There's only one thing that will cause fulfillment and happiness, and that's to know yourself as the active presence of love and have that be the predominant energy that runs your field. Now, we've strayed a long, long, long way from home. And the road back, Yeshua said, few are those who will find the gate. And I'd offer that fewer yet are those who will pass through the gate. The key tool for that return journey is to collapse on a consistent, persistent basis every falsity, wherever it comes from in your mind or your physiology, to collapse into it, bring the root of it to the presence of love, which is going to create healing in that particular part of your physiology, so that that particular part of your physiology, those cells are literally restored to functioning out of their connection to love rather than out of content based in hostility, fear, winning, controlling, falsity, whatever your mind has told you have to do. And to do that, you got to be out of your mind. So we're here on this show to support you being out of your mind. And we're honored to have the opportunity to do that and to join you in being out of your mind. And living from your direct connection to conscious, active, present love. And breathing is another key in that process. To hold the breath is to lock an energy into physiology that will, once again, lead us to living in false perception. It's interesting, if you go back to that lesson from A Course in Miracles that talks about what is the world. That lesson says perception is a skill made up by you to take the place of what the Creator gave you in creation. So to even live out of perception, and you know, it's like we're so far from home that who could imagine living out of something other than perception? Only those who've collapsed perception sufficiently, that is, have entered into the practice of weakening perception to the point where it becomes a shadow, a useful shadow at times. It can be helpful, but it's not the source of life, and it's not the source of truth, and it's never the truth. It can, when corrected, reflect the truth, but it is not the place yet where truth can be found. It can be truth's reflection. And stepping back to the truth of who we are is key. Whatever you need to do that piece of work. And we are here to learn that process with you We are here to teach that process because one of the things we've discovered is we teach best that which we most need to learn. And we're here to support you in that process. And honored and delighted that you're here to join us in that. So we breathe with you. We hold the space for all who are in any kind of suffering. Recognize and acknowledge our interconnectedness and our oneness. And breathe with you. And so if that stirs any thoughts for you, if you have any questions or thoughts, then please push 1. Let's have a conversation. If you're on one of those stations where we can't see you in our control panel, our call-in number, and if you call this number, you'll be listening to the show, is 563-999-3581. And if you're listening to the show and you push 1, through the magic of this awesome technology, and thank you for the technology that we have to be able to share this show with you, a little hand goes up in Jeannie's control panel, and she'll say, area code 513, you're on the air. Give us a name. Where are you calling from? And we can have a conversation. How cool is that? And then beyond that, once the show is over, you can go to our website, whyagain.org, whyagain.org. Up in the upper left-hand corner, the very tippy top of the page, you'll see the words, Start Here, and a link. And if you click that link, it'll walk you through all of the key information, and it's all there. Yeah, I can remember early in my teaching career, I remember one trainer that said to me, well, Michael, you always have to hold something back so you've got something to give them later. Well, we haven't held anything back. It's all there. Everything we've got is there. We're delighted to extend it to you and to share it with you. You can also open your app store on your phone and type in the words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. Heartland, all one word, Heartland, Aramaic, Aramaic, forgiveness. And what you'll be looking at when you type that in your app store is the world's first forgiveness process, or pardon me, world's first forgiveness app created by Jeannie. And you will never have any idea how many I don't know, maybe even more than hundreds of hours she put into developing that app for us. And so tap in, it's free, it's totally private. We invite you to take it and put it to work. You can do the forgiveness process right there on your phone. And you can be confident in telling it anything because you're the only one that can possibly have any sort of access to what you put in there. You'll notice there's only one permission that the phone asks for, or that the app asks for, and that's just to be able to use the internet so it can function. That's it. We don't want your contacts or your pictures or the ability to control this or change that, or all the crazy permissions that are asked by so many different apps. Just one, just use the internet. If you choose to print when you've finished doing a worksheet on the app, if you choose to print that worksheet, then the app will ask for permission to save it to your hard drive. So there is a second permission involved if you choose to print what you do. Otherwise, if you shut the app down, it just dissipates back into the electronic world. It becomes a series of electrons flowing in a computer and gone. So we are at about the halfway point of the show. We've got half an hour for questions and conversation. And we would love to hear your voice. We would love to hear how we can support you. because that's the purpose of this show. So, Jeannie, do we have anybody on the phone with a hand up? Or anybody in the chat room with a thought or a question for us?
No, it is all quiet. So if someone presses 1, you're first in line with no waiting.
So I can only imagine that if I'd been standing in your hometown today and you had come to hear me speak, at your local library or university or prison or church, whatever it was, and I shared what I just shared with you, that when I walked down the platform, I can just about guarantee that every person listening right now, as I walked off that platform, would at least have the urge to come over and say, well, Michael, I just have a quick question. So the purpose of this show is not for me to do a monologue. The purpose of this show is to give you some information that we've developed over the last 50 years of developing this work, and to support you in the use of the tools. So what would your question be if you walked over to me? And if you feel like, gee, my voice would be shaky because I'm on the radio, or I want to keep myself private, you don't have to use your real name. If you want to use, make yourself Charlie calling. And can you make it okay if your voice is a little shaky? And come forward with your question. Because your questions are everybody's questions. Sometimes those people say, well, I'm just starting at this, so being a newbie, I don't even know what questions. My question would be, well, let's say hello.
Awesome. Area code 417, you're on the air. Is this Sam?
This is Sam.
Well, hey there, young lady. Good to hear your voice. Great. Let's go for it.
Does this stuff really work?
Well, Sam, why don't you tell me, having been involved for the last, what was your first intensive, about 25, 26 years ago at Heartland?
It was actually, I think it was in 2001.
2001. I was thinking it was a little earlier than that. 18 years. Well, how many people have you tutored in forgiveness since then? And tell us, does it work? I'll turn the question back to you.
Well, I thought you were crazy when I first heard this work.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
You thought I was crazy? Really? Tell me, why is that?
Actually, my first intensive, the first night of orientation, I thought, this guy is nuts. And 2 days later, I thought, he's just full of crap. And I told you that later, and he said, oh, so then you realize that was just a projection? And I said, exactly.
Would I say such
On
a
day
thing?
3,
Probably.
I went into process after watching a movie, landed on the floor in a fit of just crying. I had no idea what was going on. And you came in and said, are you willing to breathe? And I had no idea what that meant. And a mat was laid out on the floor, and I think 7 people were around me doing energy field work. You were at my head, and I breathed for 2 hours, and I came out the other side in a pure state of bliss. And I started doing this work. And I started learning, and I learned more, and I learned more, and I did more, and I forgave more, and I moved through so much pain that I was holding. I was just amazed. It was not a short process because I was very resistant. And as soon as I let go of my resistance, things just started happening.
Well, it's interesting, in Aramaic, the word Satan is not some dude with a red suited tail and a pitchfork. The word Satan means the resistor, one who misleads.
I learned that. I learned that it was all within me and I had no idea. And that was just the biggest realization, because I wanted it to be everyone else's fault. And I remember
I've never met anybody who had that desire.
I remember when I had just the biggest eureka moment during one of the intensives, when I realized I can't believe my own mind. I was just really shocked at that, because after all I've been through in my life and everything that has happened around me, to me, for me, everything, I thought the only thing I could trust was my own mind. And once I really got that I can't even believe my own mind, that I have to constantly question what my thinking is, it was just the biggest shock to me, because I had the belief that everyone thought the same way I did. So if everyone thought the same way I did, then their thinking would be the same and their behavior would be the same, and they would act like I do, and they don't, and why don't they? And when I learned that my thoughts were messed up, that I couldn't believe everything, and I started really investigating, just magical things happened inside of me. And I am just in a joyful space in my life. And I love myself, and I'm happy, and I just can't express what this work has done for me. And I will be eternally grateful for you for sharing this work with me.
Well,
and I encourage anyone. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I encourage anyone that is sitting on the fence about learning this work, jump in with both feet, because you will be blessed by it.
Well, I'll say thank you for saying thank you. And one of the things I really appreciate about you, Sam, is how many people you have chosen to hand the work to and support them moving through some of those deep resistances and waking up to the truth of how the whole game works. So thank you for being willing to do that. On a scale of 1 to 10, of all the people that I've worked with over the decades, you're probably in the top 5% of people who have really taken it and reached out and passed it on to others in a way that has made it effective. And I've heard from those people, and they've said, I worked with Sam and she just really supported me. So thank you for doing that. That's one of the most powerful ways of saying thank you for receiving this work.
Thank you. I recall making a commitment sitting in the Heart Center years ago. Made a commitment to you, to God, to the universe, to take whatever knowledge I have in this work and share it whenever I have the opportunity to do it. And I never, ever pass up that opportunity.
All right.
I have helped cashiers standing behind a register in a store. I have helped telemarketers. I had a telemarketer call one time, and he thanked me for being so kind and nice to him. And I said, I would imagine you get a lot of really angry people. And he said, oh, yes. So I started sharing with him that if he held a space of love, he could dissolve their anger and really help them as he helps himself. And he didn't want to hang up. He said, I want to hear more about this. So I directed him to your website. That was years ago. I bought a lawnmower at Sears one time, and I had so many problems with it, and they delivered it, and it was broken. They delivered another one, and they messed that up. And I had a letter come in the mail from the salesperson complimenting me for being so kind. And he said, through your kindness, I have learned kindness. So it just flows. It's just, whatever you put out there comes back to you. And we can help others by just being who we are. And that is what I think the beauty of this work is.
Sweet.
Learning to be in that space.
And, less people think, well, you probably didn't have any real problems to deal with. So it's just kind of, maybe you could share, if appropriate, what, and I remember that first big still point session that you did. You'd been at the intensive for 3 or 4 days, and something just broke wide open. Would it be appropriate to share what that was?
I am an open book. I had a severely dysfunctional childhood. I was raised in an alcoholic home. I was not fed properly. I was emotionally abused. Those are many things that you probably aren't even aware of. I recall eating white bread and sugar sandwiches a lot because there was no other food, and I'd be playing and I'd go in the house and that's what I would prepare for myself. Meals weren't regular, food wasn't regular, bathing wasn't regular. I lived in a house that was filled with roaches, and I actually thought they were my relatives. I was a bedwetter. I didn't have blankets on my bed, but I had some old coats that I would cover up with in the winter. I was a bedwetter, and my mattress was pea-soaked with rusted springs coming through. And I remember crawling in the bed trying to get comfortable on those rusted springs. It was pretty bad, and I didn't realize how bad it was. I thought all that was normal growing up.
Right.
And there was just a lot of chaos in my family, a lot of racism, a lot of anger, a lot of craziness, a lot of fighting. I would go to bed at night wondering which parent would be dead in the morning from the physical abuse and the fighting. And then I wondered who I would live with if both of them were dead. And I look back on that, and I'm truly amazed that I even made it through all of that. And then when I was 19 years old, I came home and found my mother dead in bed. She had had a heart attack. And then a year later, my brother, who was 9 years older than me, was murdered. He was shot to death and left a wife and 3 children. And then in 1986, I had a sister-in-law that was murdered, and she was stabbed to death 27 times. And then my brother, who was married to her, kind of went off the deep end, and he had a daughter with Down syndrome, and I obtained guardianship of her. Then my father died. Then my niece died right after that, and then my only brother died. And then my son-in-law died in a car accident, and then my husband had an affair and left. And that was all within a 4-year period. And I arrived in Heartland. So you didn't have anything
on your plate at all at that first intensive?
I didn't have what?
I'd say you didn't have anything at all on your plate at that first intensive.
No, I just came there to observe, Michael. I just thought, well, let me just come and see if I can help you.
You were going to audit the class, right?
Exactly. I'm just going to come here and observe. And maybe I could go back and teach my husband a thing or two. And before I arrived, you told me on the phone, well, why don't you come for your own healing? Because through your healing, your family will heal. And I thought that was just absurd. And I didn't have very much family left at that time. And I was just in so much denial about what was going on inside of me and the pain that I was holding. And the first 3 days, we had a juice fast. And I was still just having so much resistance. And then we had movie night. And you put in a movie, and I've seen it happen so many times. It's just like you intuitively know what movie to put in for the people that are sitting there watching. And as I'm sitting there watching this movie, I'm having this volcano erupt in my gut, going, I don't know what's going on. And in the movie, all of a sudden, a man had a razor blade, and he reached up and he cut the side of a lady's face. And all of a sudden, I had an explosion in my gut that I could not control. And I had been trying to stuff those feelings back down, and I jumped up and ran to the bathroom, and I just remember just collapsing on the bathroom floor. And someone came in and said, "Sam, are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And that was a biggie for me to say I wasn't okay. And the next thing I knew, you arrived at the door and asked if I would be willing to do a breath session. And I said, "I don't know what that is, but let's do it." And as I was breathing and tightening up, you kept reminding me to relax and let it go. And you said, "Do you want to hold on to this?" And I said, "No." And you said, "Then just relax and let it go." And when I got through breathing, which I think it lasted about 2 hours, I sat up and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm breathing out of my lower abdomen." I have never breathed that low. I'd always heard somebody would say, "Take a deep abdominal breath," and I couldn't breathe past my chest, and I never understood what that was. And you told me that's our third diaphragm, and that's where we're supposed to breathe. And I said, "But Michael, I feel like this, I'm breathing all the way out of my butt." And you said, "But okay, then we'll call it butt still point." And I woke up the next morning and I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. And the next day, I remember walking into the Heart Center to hear your talk that day, and I was in a pure state of bliss. That's the only way I could describe it. It was like birds and butterflies were flying around my head. And I was just in this fantasy world of feeling wonderful. And that lasted for about 3 days. And I remember walking back in, and you said, "Sam, how are you doing today?" And I said, "Michael, my bliss is gone." And you said, "Well, it'll come back. You know how to get there now." And my bliss is there probably 99.9% of the time, because I know how to achieve it and I know what to do. And I know how to use these tools. And you've always said it's the greatest work on the planet, and I tell everyone that. Many people are as resistant as I was, and I understand that. But if they only knew how simple it is, they would follow your path. I can't say that it's easy, because we have so much built up inside of us that we don't want to let go of. But it's very, very simple if you let go and have the willingness. And I just remember you always saying willingness is the cosmic grease of the universe. And we just have to let go. And I've seen changes in my own family as a result of it. And I'm just blessed to have this work and know the tools.
Well, it's delightful to have you share that people can get a taste, especially if there are folks out there who haven't really done any of the work, that maybe will be inspired to pick up that wake-up sheet. It's such a key tool to the whole process of life and the restoration to the truth of who we are as bliss. That's the whole idea.
I think one of the things that hold people back is that they don't realize the pain that they're holding. I honestly didn't realize that when I arrived at Heartland. I didn't realize what I was holding inside. I remember walking around all the time with a scowl look on my face. My face was all in a frown and my eyebrows were tight. And I remember having that look all the time. But I didn't know I had that much pain. I didn't know I had that much healing to do. Because we cover it with anger and frustration and fear, and we don't know it's there.
Exactly. If we circle around to the opening of today's radio show, that state of falsity that we think is, well, I'm normal and okay at this point. Well, normal, quite often, it is normal. It has become the norm in our culture, but the norm is pretty insane. It's pretty bizarre carrying that kind of load when we're designed to live plugged into love. It's like, how crazy does it get when people just, pop off and go into a fit of rage or depression or whatever, just on a second's notice. And the work of cleaning that up is the work of a lifetime. Especially when you realize, if you when, and you've never really described to me in the kind of depth you just did what your earliest childhood was like. I was not aware on that level, but when you realize that you're the early adopter of the work, it's probably fairly easy as it is for me to conceive of. Nobody in my bloodline's ever thought of living differently than the way we live. This is just the way it is. That falsity, that perceptual construct based in hostility or fear has just become the norm for so many people, and they watch their power person do it, and they just mimic, they play out. One of the things we're getting to do with Aria Rain, our granddaughter, who's now been circling the earth for about 14 months outside of the womb, and we're getting to watch her mimic everything. I mean, everything. And most adults at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 are still mimicking the traumas of their earliest childhood, and in many cases calling that a happy life. Because heck, if I've got a fifth of scotch on top of it, or 3 or 4 shots of caffeine, or a little sugar, or a little nicotine, a little pot, well, hey, this is cool. This is life, and that's what I'm talking about with people living in the falsity, and missing out on the opportunity to really experience and develop their human lives, what we're designed for.
We don't realize that. We don't realize there's anything different. Back in the 80s, I went to a treatment center for depression because I had a lot of physical problems. I had Lyme disease, and I just had a lot of physical problems, and it was just frustrating. I wasn't getting any help, and I was just severely depressed. And one of the doctors at the treatment center called me into his office one time, and he said, "So Sam, tell me about your childhood. Did you think you had a normal childhood?" And I just looked at him, and I was kind of shocked at the question, and I said, "Well, yeah, I had a very normal childhood." And he was in a swivel chair, in an office chair, and he threw himself backwards against the wall in the chair and absolutely roared. And he said, "Honey, you have had nothing, you have had nothing normal about your childhood." I can't remember exactly how he worded it. Your childhood was anything but normal. And I was just so surprised at that. I thought that was normal. I thought it was normal to not bathe. I thought it was normal to not brush your teeth. It was normal to not eat. It was normal for a child to go in and make a mayonnaise or a sugar sandwich because there wasn't any food. I thought that was normal. I thought it was normal to have coats across you when you went to bed and never have clean sheets. I just didn't. If that's all you're ever given, that's what normal becomes. And so we don't question. We just go with it, and it becomes our norm. And so people that are living in that anger and that fear go through their daily lives believing that's what they're supposed to do. I see cashiers in stores that are just totally exasperated after dealing with someone that was just irate to them, and I always make a comment and try to console them and say something, and they start having anger. I just see it in their faces, and if I can do anything to calm them down and say, just know that was about that person and not about you. And they thanked me for it. I was on the phone for 2 hours the other night with Verizon to try to get something accomplished. And I remember the lady, as we were hanging up, said to me, "Thank you for being so kind." Is that unusual for people to be kind? I hear that a lot about my kindness.
Well, it's one of the attributes of human life when you've got one. But sadly, a lot of people don't have one.
I know it. I never realized that before until I hear it so often. You were so kind. Well, isn't that how we're supposed to be? Not if that's not your norm.
Well, we're delighted to be joining you in creating a different norm on the planet that moves us back to the truth of who we are, functioning out of the active presence of love as we are designed to. So thank you for joining us in that.
I wouldn't have it if I hadn't have learned it from you. I just encourage anybody who hears this to really get in there and understand what this work means, to understand how you have put it together. And you've said for years, you've taken bits and pieces from different places, and I always tell everybody, Michael has taken so many different things and put it together in a basket and says, here, this is what you need. This is it. And I'm just amazed that you have put it together so well. And it sounds bizarre to people that aren't familiar with the work, but I have to tell you, it's the greatest work I've seen. I've had counselors and therapists that I've taught this work to that said, I never heard of such a thing. I never heard of this. One thing that I think is that really stands out in the work is the punishment thought. When I understood how powerful that punishment thought is, because when I first heard it, I thought, we don't punish. Where are you coming up with this punishment thought? Once you realize and understand how people punish, you see it every day in your life. It's just out there. There's always a punishment thought attached to any anger or upset. And I encourage people to look at that punishment thought, even if they don't think they have an issue or if they don't think they have anything to heal. Start looking at how you punish other people or yourselves. And many times I've found that people punish themselves. They turn that anger inward toward them. And the destruction through their anger is toward themselves, and they beat up on themselves. I've worked with so many people that really have no love for themselves at all.
And what they call love is simply the avoidance of punishment. I remember a particular time, Jeannie and I were standing in a grocery store behind a woman who had a little boy that was maybe 2.5 or 3, and she had a shopping cart filled with food, and he wanted some grapes, and no, you can't have them. And he put up a bit of a fuss, and Mom just went a little berserk on him. And I went ahead and went out to get the car and bring it up to the front door of the store. And Jeannie, the woman, had pulled aside to pack things in her cart and do whatever she was going to do with this little kid. And so she was standing at the front door waiting for me to pull up as this woman came out with her little son. And her son is, as this woman came out with her little son, and her son is crying to his mom. Jeannie overheard it. It was pretty impactful. Crying to his mom, "Mom, I love you. I love you. Please don't beat me."
Oh.
2.5, 3-year-old child already learning that he can say those words about love in order to avoid being beaten. How crazy does he get? And so we're here to adjust the norm back to where we function as love. And instead of thinking it's something we do to each other or something we can do to avoid punishment or whatever, so many games of the mind that need to be collapsed and forgiven. And as time goes, I just got the warning signal that the show is about to shut down on us because we're almost complete. And I would love to, if it's appropriate, if there's any more to share tomorrow, to continue the conversation, or Monday, I guess it would be. And in the meantime, everybody, have the best year yet of your eternal life. Thanks for calling,